in terms of Tanja, it had some corrective measures, and the country is back on track, and civilian, democratically elected leaders are now in charge of the country once more.
Dr. Fomunyoh, on May 25, 2010, the Africa Day was celebrated. And in Johannesburg, the Africa Progress Panel came up with a report, the Africa Progress Report, on the economic life of the continent. What are your views on the investigations of that report?
Well, I think basically the report came out with the conclusion that that Africa has enormous economic potential, that there's been some economic growth, considerable economic growth, but that the obstacles to even better economic growth is the question of poor governance. And I would subscribe to that analysis and that report 100%, because many of us working on the governance issues have said so all along. We've said Africa is not a poor continent. It's the poor governance that has kept the continent down. Because when you look in terms of natural resources, Africa has an overflow of natural resources. We've got oil, we've got diamonds, we've got bauxite, we've got uranium. Even in countries like Niger that you just talked about, Niger is right in the middle of the Sahel region, or in the Sahara, close to the Sahara Desert. But it's got uranium, it's got gold, it's now got oil, which is recently been found. There is not an African country that you would go to that doesn't have some natural resources. On top of that, we've got a people that are just so resilient, intelligent, hardworking, and that have survived, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. So that combination of enormous material resources and human capital should give this continent better economic growth than we've noted so far. And the thing that continues to keep the continent down is the whole issue of democratic governance, or lack thereof.
You know, for about 10 years, the European Commission has been pumping billions of dollars to Africa to be able to help in its development. But the development aid is not bearing any fruits. How can, Africans take their destiny into their own hands, rather than relying on development aid from abroad?
Yeah, I think increasingly that's a growing concern amongst Africans, but even amongst development partners, that aid alone cannot guarantee development. And secondly, that aid poorly managed exacerbates some of the problems that we have on the African continent. Because in a number of cases, aid has been channeled to various countries and has been so poorly managed that it hasn't reached the population groups that were targeted to benefit from the aid.
Can you say it's because of lack of follow-up from those who are funding these countries or organizations?
It's, first of all, lack of transparent management and accountability on the part of those that are charged with the responsibility of managing this aid in a way as to get it to the people that need it most. Secondly, it's also the lack of follow-up and I'd like to almost say intellectual honesty on the part of the people who provide the aid. Because what happens when aid is provided to an African country and the government officials of that country swindle some of the aid and lodge those resources in foreign bank accounts in the countries that gave the aid in the first case? Shouldn't someone blow the whistle in those countries to say, how come your country needs aid? How come X amount of billions of dollars are being sent into your country, and at the same time, you as an individual have accumulated this amount of wealth when your country needs that aid? So I think it's going to require a combined effort, more attention on the part of the providers of the aid, or the donors and development partners, and also better management and greater transparency and accountability on the part of African leaders who should really be managing this assistance to benefit the populations that we're all supposed to serve.
Besides the Africa Progress Report that was presented on May 25, we also had a report on the International Crisis Group that is based in Brussels that politically analyzed the situation of Cameroon since the time of independence. The report says Cameroon's apparent stability followed by violent crisis cannot be taken for granted. Do you agree that the possibility of long-term deterioration leading to more open conflict cannot be exploited in the country?
Well, first of all, let me say that the International Crisis Group is a very serious organization. And I say that very pointedly because over the years, we've grown into the habit of dismissing reports issued by organizations that we don't like, or reports that were unfavorable to us were automatically dismissed, not because of their content, not because of the analysis of the report, but because someone didn't like the organization in question. So I will start off by saying the International Crisis Group is a serious organization. It's got experts that have done this kind of work for years, and it's an organization that has a reputation. So my plea would be that we take that report seriously, read through it, look at the contents, analyze it properly, and if there are corrective measures that need to be taken, take those measures to make sure that this train that's carrying 20 million Cameroonians doesn't go off the tracks. Secondly, I would say that there's some truth when the International Crisis Group says there's an apparent stability in Cameroon, there's apparent stability in Cameroon, but that from time to time we have an outburst of crisis. And we've seen that at various points in this country's history. At independence, we had the crisis around independence that had a huge impact, negative impact in parts of our country, most notably in areas of the Bassa land, in the Bamileke region, where families lost a lot of their members in the struggle for independence for Cameroon. We never conducted any thorough examination of that entire process. There's still a lot of wounds that haven't fully healed from what happened in this country around the time of independence. We had the crisis that happened in 1984, 2 years after Biya had come into power, when there was an attempted coup and there was an outburst of violence and people lost lives. Recently, we had the crisis around the constitutional debate, the February 2008, when a lot of young people took out to the streets and there was violence and young people lost their lives. That, for me, is symptomatic of the fact that there are some ingredients within our society that we need to pay attention to, and we don't have to wait until they bubble to the surface in the form of violence to then react to them or address them after the fact or after the event. And my hope is that as Cameroon moves closer to important, crucial presidential elections in 2011, that we make sure that we don't create an environment that could, that could lead to violence or disputes that would have the kind of crisis that are being projected by the International Crisis Group.
You know, from the kind of analysis you made, one would conclude that the government is unable to handle, the political situation Cameroon has been facing, in the past years. Can the international community not play a role to avoid a classic case of conflict?